Alright, so I am recording. Hopefully. Alright, so welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Um, Today we're going to be talking about motherboards. So this is the motherboard module presented by me, Andre McDermott Jr., co-founder of Second Chance PC Techs. Um, let's get started into the presentation. So the number one question, right, is what is a motherboard? And so I grabbed this from Computer Hope's website, alternatively referred to as the MB, the main board, M-board, MOBO, and other acronyms, or logic board on Apple computers. The motherboard is a printed circuit board that is the foundation of a computer, located on the backside or at the bottom of the computer chassis. It allocates power and allows communication to the CPU, RAM, and all other computer components. And so I kind of like that, their definition for it. So basically, that is what a motherboard is. And so for the exam, you have to know all of the motherboard components. So that includes the expansion slots, which are the PCI Express. AGP is an older technology, but you still need to understand that. PCIe and mini PCI. Also, what's the north bridge? What's the south bridge? What are capacitors? CPU sockets, power connections and types, RAM slots, fan connectors, and it's actually a lot of components on the motherboard. But these are what you need to know for the exam. Where's the reset button? Bus speeds of the certain expansion slots. Also, you need to know the front and back panel connectors. What type of connectors will you see on the back of a motherboard? You got to know that for the A+ exam, as well as on the front panel. When you see or look at the front side of a computer, what type of connectors are you going to typically see? And that's like your USB, audio, power button, the power light, and also drive activity lights. So when you're starting or building a computer from scratch, the first component you're going to have is the motherboard. That's going to be the main, I consider it the engine of the computer, because a car with no engine is basically just scrap. Same with a computer. A computer with no motherboard is just garbage. Okay, so also another components you need to know is CMOS battery, and then the sizes or form factors, right? What's a ATX? What's a micro ATX? Mini ITX, and then an ITX. So those are the basic components and the things that you need to know for the A+ exam. So we're going to kind of go through a little bit of that. The point of this module, and for the A+ exam, and just for people getting in, new to the IT industry, the goal is to basically know everything from just looking at it. Like, so if I put up a picture of a motherboard, I expect an A+ certified technician to know, or CompTIA expects, not me, but CompTIA expects an A+ technician to basically visualize and see what components are on a motherboard just by looking at it. But to get to that point, you have to understand each of those components and what each component does, its functions, and be able to describe that for the exam. So next slide, I actually have a slide of a motherboard, and by the glance or just by looking at it, we should be able to tell what type of form factor this motherboard is, what main components we should be able to locate the north bridge, south bridge, right? We should be able to notice or locate the RAM slots, where the CPU slot is, um, just key components just from the glance of it. Now, of course, I mean, as we would, if I could zoom this picture in, we can see, or you would be able to see what each component is pointing to or located at. But I need, the goal is for all the students or everyone on the class to be able to look at this and say, okay, I know where PCI slots. I see PCI Express slots. I see, SATA ports, RAM slots, North Bridge, South Bridge, even all the way down to the capacitors. Being able to pinpoint and look at a motherboard and see exactly where those components are, that's where you should be. And that's what CompTIA says. You should know each component to that part where you can actually pinpoint it. So, like I said, what do you need to know for the exam? You need to know about the chipsets. What's a North Bridge? Right, the North Bridge is basically like, it's the software, the firmware that's controlling the key important pieces with memory, graphics card, right, and the CPU. You have to understand those three dynamics, those three components working together within that architecture or that software. The South Bridge controls everything else, right? So the USB ports, the slower I/O ports. You also need to know about form factors. Like I said, ATX, micro ATX, mini ITX, and ITX. You need to know the size of each different form factor. What's the size of the board, motherboard, the specifications, and for each category, and then also CPU sockets. You have to know Intel has their own type of CPU sockets, and so does AMD. What are they named, and the different classifications of sockets, right? So if we look into chipsets, this screenshot will show you exactly what I was talking about as far as the North Bridge, South Bridge CPU. As you can see here, I have my fancy pointer. This is our CPU, right? So this is the brain of the computer. Now we will do a module on CPUs further, but understanding that this is the CPU, this is that lane of traffic that those ones and zeros communicate, right, to the North Bridge, back and forth. That these lanes of highways, or highway, is called the front side bus. Now this is on older technology, but it's best to understand the older technology, because the newer technology is just things placed on top of old technology, right? So you have old technology, newer technology comes out as faster, better, and so front side bus, this was the speed of how fast these two components communicated to each other. With the newer technology, the North Bridge and CPU are actually combined into one chip. But I liked the legacy because it's easier to understand that way first. Okay, so you see we have our graphics card here, and this is another lane that would communicate to the North Bridge, and then you had your memory banks. So I tell my students, to be able to tell what type of form factor you have, the CPU, graphics card, and North Bridge had to form like a right triangle. So if you see a motherboard that has CPU, North Bridge, this should create a right triangle, something like this. Okay, so see here, North Bridge manages the connection between the CPU and memory, may also connect high-end graphics such as PCI Express and high-speed processors. So as I said before, they just built on top of this technology, And they decided, let's make this even faster by combining the CPU and Northbridge together in a super IO chip. And that reduces the speeds of a front side bus because everything is built in. And then it's just communicating straight from memory to graphics card. And then also Southbridge here, you see, controls slower connections like your USB, Ethernet, SATA, and also the BIOS. All right, so PCI slots, slower slots, onboard graphics cards. The Southbridge is that software that controlled the rest of that hardware. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about are the form factors. Just got another guest. Charlie, what's up? So we are talking about form factors and what type of form factors you will see on the exam. Okay, so remember I said ATX is also micro ATX. Gotta update that slide. ATX is the standard motherboard. It started by Intel in 1995. Still very popular. Most desktop computers are a ATX form factor. Second from ATX is micro ATX, right? That's a smaller form factor. That is the type of computers you'll see on like the small desktop type of computers. So you have ATX. If you want to mute yourself on the phone, all right, hit 6 so you can mute yourself. All right, so you have ATX, micro ATX, which is that smaller form factor. So if you go to Walmart or whatever, the larger desktop models are going to have an ATX motherboard. The smaller models where you can actually put a monitor on top of it and sit it on the table or desk, that's going to be a micro ATX. And also mini ITX, those are even smaller form factor, similar mounting points as ATX and micro, but these are designed for like single purposes, i.e. media streaming, the very small type of computers. Even if DVRs, a lot of things, motherboards, a lot of even gaming consoles have motherboards in them that are different form factors, like a micro ITX. Okay. Also, over here you see expansion slots and bus speeds. You need to understand the speeds of these expansion slots and buses, because that's also going to be on the exam. CompTIA expects you to understand the throughputs for the different types of connections for expansion slots. So for video cards and different other types of cards, they have speeds and throughputs that you have to know. So like PCIe or PCI Express, it's a serial communication, times 1, times 2, times 4, times 8, times 16, and times 32 lanes, right? So those are different serial meaning both devices are communicating at the same time, but it's sending out one bit of information. So parallel, you have multiple 32 64-bit lanes, but it was all at the same sequence, and it was a half duplex communication. So it will send out something and wait and have to respond, wait for the computer or device to respond back. Serial, it's one lane or 2 or 4 or 8, 16, 32 lanes, but it's full duplex, meaning that both devices are communicating at the same time. So faster speeds, better performance. And so that's why most high-end graphic cards are PCI Express, right? And we have to be able to see that just by looking at a motherboard and understanding, okay, this is a PCI Express slot, this is a PCI Express card, understanding what type of card and slot we're going to put it into. Because if people are coming to you and you're building a high performance computer, you need to understand down to the motherboard what slots and speeds each component has. Okay. And then many PCI Express cards, laptops also have these mini PCI Express cards. So for memory, or not memory, but for wireless Bluetooth, those use mini PCI Express slots, and you need those type of cards to add to your device to give it better performance, better features. So if you look, I have CPU sockets part 1. So the first here is a zero insertion force. This is the pin grid array. So back in the day when Intel created the pin grid array and the zero insertion force ZIF socket, a lot of the processors it would be hard to basically remove those CPU sockets from the zero insertion force or ZIF socket, because due to heat and the compression, you will basically destroy the CPU trying to remove it out of this slot or socket. So that's when they changed it and made a land grid array, LGA type of socket. And these, as you can see, all the pins back in pin grid array, each processor had pins on it, gold pins. So even when I was working in the recycling facility, when people would donate their computers, we would take out the processors because this has precious metal in it, which is gold. These pins are gold. So if those pins got bent while you were trying to insert this CPU in this socket, this processor was damaged. So imagine paying thousands of dollars back in the day and then damaging one of these pins, and basically that $1,000 is garbage. It's nothing. You can't use it. So they changed it to the land grid array. So all the pins now are inside the socket. As you can see, these are other capacitors, and actually with some type of remember I was saying that the CPU and the North Bridge are combined. So this is what you would see on newer computers. The North Bridge is built into this socket, CPU socket. So your CPU and North Bridge are integrated into one. We will put the chip, the processor, CPU processor, in this socket. Make sure that it's like another silver metal that would lay on top of it. And once you would pin this down, the CPU was set. You couldn't move it, you couldn't take it out. So when they changed the type of socket, you did not have to worry about destroying your CPU, right? CPUs cost thousands of dollars, couple $100. So this was just a better improvement compared to the pin grid array. Second here, so this is the actual breakdown of the two different type of sockets. For Intel, for the exam, you need to know what a socket T, socket B, socket H and H1, socket H2, H3, and then R. And then this chart breaks it down: what type, LGA, how many pins, right? So if you see an LGA 775, know that that's 775 pins. It also gives you what type of Pentium, processor use that type of socket, which for the socket T or LGA 775, it was the Pentium core or Pentium 4 or the Core 2. So for the exam, you have to know the land grid array, how many pins, and typically it'd be like LGA 1336. And for that, the type of CPU is a Core i7, right? So you have to know which core or type of CPU processor goes in which type of socket, okay, for the exam. Same thing with AMD. AMD is a little bit more easier. It's not that many, but it's AM3. That's a PGA. How many pins? 941. And then the type of CPU is an Athlon 2 or Phenom 2. Okay. And so this chart, you can definitely review. I will be sending this out. Next slide, resources. Okay. So if you want to know where I get or where's a good place to go to understand motherboards, check out Computer Hope, www.computerhope.com. They have good terminology on motherboards and they actually break down each component. If you go to the second resource here, this is my motherboard quiz. So I have a quiz that should help you further your study of motherboards. Go back and read chapter 7 in the book, because chapter 7 is mostly on motherboards, but they do combine power and power supplies in that too. So go back and read chapter 7 in the book, and then the Professor Messer handout. That's also a link here. And also check out Newegg. I think because technology always changes, go and see what recent or new motherboards look like, okay? And kind of see and understand what the costs of a motherboard are. It's good experience, real world to see, okay? I want an i7, okay? You know what type of processor you want, but what type of motherboard are you gonna put in there? Because that's the next important piece, right? That's the important piece. Like I said, it's the engine, okay? You can't put a V8 engine, in a Toyota. You gotta have the right engine in the right chassis, or the right engine in the right car. So your motherboard is very important because that depends on what type of processing power, RAM, hard drives, everything else connects to the motherboard. So go in and research and see, what motherboards cost and things like that. So that's the end of that module. Ask QA time. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and let's see if we can if I can answer any questions you have. See, it's short, sweet, to the point. Hello?
Hello, how you all doing? This is Linda Short.
Hey, Miss Linda, how you doing?
All right.
You got some questions for me?
Yes.
Okay.
I forgot my question. It'll go to somebody else. It'll come back to me.
Okay. Anybody else got questions? I know Terrence, Courtney, Charlie. About motherboards. Any questions on motherboards? If not, I will send everybody this presentation too. It should be recording, so hopefully, like I said, I'm trying to fix my recording situation. No questions. everybody understands what a motherboard does, what components are in it. Everybody's gotten 90 or 100 on assessment exams on motherboards.
No.
Okay, so what what was giving you problems, or what kind of caught you up on that assessment or reading the chapter?
I wish I could see the presentation, like the North and the South Bridge and all of the components that go. Because you were just talking about it. Wish I could have seen it for it to make more sense. So I think once I can watch your presentation, I think that'll help me formulate the question.
Okay, but do you know what the North Bridge does? I mean, you understand what it does?
I don't.
No. Okay, so the
I mean,
North.
that was a loud noise. I mean, based on what I did here over a few other things I was having to use with, that's the one where the South Bridge is the one that does the least amount of work. The North Bridge is the one. I'm not saying that appropriately.
The South Bridge
Yeah.
controls the slower types of components. So like your USB, Ethernet, um, CMOS, a lot of the other, because you got to understand that software controls the hardware. Okay, when we're talking about a motherboard is controlled, and in the next class we'll talk about the BIOS and what that does. But the firmware or software, right? So whenever you hear firmware, think of software. The South Bridge is just a chip. Okay, that chip, there's software on that chip that controls other components on the motherboard. They don't know what to do except if software tells it what to do, type of situation. So the software or the chip is called the South Bridge. Okay, now that that piece of hardware or chip just communicates with certain devices that the North Bridge doesn't. Because the North Bridge, all it cares about is the memory, the CPU, and the RAM. Those three, that's the triangle for the North Bridge. Okay, North Bridge, all it cares about is CPU, RAM, and graphics. Everything else is controlled by the South Bridge. Those are the two main chips, well, three if you include the CPU, that are physically installed or put on every motherboard ever made forever. Okay, it's just the two biggest components, North and South Bridge. It kind of gets confusing if you don't understand what they do. But like I said, the South Bridge only works with the other components that the North Bridge doesn't. It's real simple. North Bridge is CPU, RAM, and graphics. Everything else is South Bridge. So I hope that does that make somewhat sense or no?
It does. Now, you mentioned memory before, so
Right.
you mentioned CPU, RAM, and memory, and then you said graphics.
CPU.
I
If I say RAM and memory, those two are the same thing. So the CPU,
Okay.
RAM, and your graphics card. So those three components are handled by the North Bridge. Okay. And then everything else like USB ports, hard drives, PCI, all of the other technology or components are controlled by the South Bridge. And so if I can, yeah, I think you're right. If you could see my presentation, it would make more sense, because this is your CPU here, and then immediately next to it is the North Bridge. You can actually see it. You can see um, it's close, very close in proximity to the CPU and your RAM. And that's how it's always going to be for an ATX type of board. Now, your South Bridge is further away from the North Bridge, and you can actually see the other components on this motherboard picture slide that I have. Everything is closer to the South Bridge, like the PCI slots, SATA, and other components. So I think you're right, Cornette. When you get this presentation, go back and review it, because you'll see what I'm talking about, like CPU, North Bridge, and RAM. And you'll see how they're very close together. And then I have another slide that actually is like, it shows the chipsets and the flow of everything and how it's connected. So if you still have questions after today.
I was gonna say, and when you say chipsets, what do you mean?
Chipsets are like the actual components. So the North Bridge is a chipset. That's a chip that's built exactly, is built onto the motherboard. They call that a chipset. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So anything that's built on the board itself, besides like capacitors and other things, the actual chips, they call it chipsets. That's a good question. Got any other questions? Yeah.
And then when you were talking about different speeds of things,
hmm
in terms of the difference, you were saying the difference. What the word was you used? Not the chip.
Like throughput. So when I was talking about the slots, the expansion slots and bus speeds, for like PCI, those, because it's a legacy type of expansion slot, the speeds could only go as fast as the memory, or back in the day they called it the front side bus. That's the type of lanes that you got to remember. At the end of the day, we're talking about ones and zeros, right? Ons and offs traveling through um, circuitry on this board. Okay, that that happens at a certain speed. And so for a PCI, and I have this slide up, it says the speeds range from like 133 megabits or megabytes, big B, megabytes per second, to 533 megabytes per second. So PCI could only work, so even if we had memory, right, we were going to use memory. Every computer has memory. Those speeds matched the same speed of your slots, or the same speeds of the buses. A bus is just like a lane for the bits or bytes of information to travel on. So if we put some memory, like DDR memory, um, the speed of the memory could be like 333 megahertz, right? That's the speed. That's how fast it can communicate. So these slots, PCI slot, could communicate at 133 megabytes per second. So that's just for PCI. Now I have another slide, or the same slide. It says for PCI extended, or PCI X, it could go as fast as 1064 megabytes per second. So that's huge. That's almost twice the speed compared to PCI, right? And so PCI Express, those speeds now can go up to 250 megabytes per second, up to 2 gigabytes per second. So the bandwidth, how fast data can communicate along these lines, like a highway, right? The faster the speed limit, the faster cars gonna go, right? If the speed limit on a damn Ryan is 20 miles an hour, everybody gonna be going 20 miles an hour. That's how fast data could communicate, right? Back in the day with PCI, older technology, it was 133. Now, if we're using PCI Express, newer bus, newer highway, right, faster lanes, it can go to 2 gigabytes per second. That's almost like quadruple the speed that data could communicate. So if you go back, read chapter 7, it's a lot of things where they talk about buses and the types of speeds. It's good to understand the old though, right? If you understand the old stuff, because when I was studying, Windows 2000 was out, right? When I took my A plus, I was studying for the 2000, Windows 2000. Now it's Windows 10. Think about the difference in technology from Windows 2000 to Windows 10. Everything is different, all the way down to the motherboard, all the way down to how fast information can travel on the board itself. Okay, so that's why I say it's good to understand the old, because the new is just faster and better. Same technology sometimes, just better. Okay, so PCI old, PCIe new, and the difference is it's with the older speed compared to the newer, it's a faster speed. Does that make sense? Okay. But I do think when you see the slide and the presentation, it will kind of make more sense for you. And if you got any questions, ask me in class or next time we do this, and we can kind of go over it. Okay. Any other questions? Charlie, you got some questions? No. So, well, I got a question. How does this, once I kind of get my flow, is this stuff helping you guys? That's one of my questions. Is something like this going to help you further your learning? Is it good? Is it not good? I know it's Sunday. You could be with family. I want to know, do you think these type of sessions are going to help you get your A plus and understand the information a little bit more? That's my question to everybody on the call. What's up, Charlie? Okay, because I know you the only one on Skype, so everybody else is called in. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that info. Cause yeah, me and Courtney figured that she was trying to connect too, and I have a personal, but I got a business one too. So if everybody, yeah, right. Okay. Cool. and you should be good. Okay, that's what I was hoping was gonna happen. But I know everybody don't have a business one, and that's the thing with Skype. So I'm still figuring it out, Charlie, and trying to get my whole multimedia, man. I'm gonna talk with you, bro. We got to talk, man.
So what I did, I was able to put my audio back to the computer.
Yeah,
But you record the screen, started on your probably it's just probably Gmail. I don't know how you connect it. Verify how you can use one headset and going into the computer. How you doing it?
yeah. I'm using one going into the computer, and then I got everybody on the phone. And like I said, I got this audio via phone. So hopefully this transfer over in the QA because I do have my headset on too, but I may not hear the questions and everybody's conversation. So that's one piece I need your help with is trying to find that total solution.
Yes, no problem at all.
Okay.
Yes, that's an easy one.
All right, cool, brother. But did you I know you kind of jumped in on a little bit. I am recording this thing though, so I will send that out to everybody. And if you got any questions or whatever, definitely let me know. But the goal is to break down each kind of component. So like today we talked about motherboards. Next week we'll do BIOS, right? Because I think you got to understand, you know, you ain't gonna worry about the BIOS first, because you need the motherboard. You need the motherboard first, right? That's the first component. Like if you were starting from scratch and you say I want to build a computer, the first thing you're gonna need is a motherboard, right? You're gonna buy the motherboard typically with like a case, right? Where you would screw the case or the motherboard into the case, and then you'll put the CPU and heat sink and all that on top of that. Make sure that's fast. Everything is good with that. Thermal paste on the processor and put your heat sink, cool it off. Then you got to add the other components, right? Hard drive, RAM, and other things. So I want to do it piece by piece, as if we're kind of building a computer. So like I say, next class we'll talk about BIOS, then maybe a little bit of power. Try to combine two things, and then we'll talk about CPUs, then RAM, right? And kind of just give you a overall picture, okay? And then like I say, I'll share my screen, have a little slide for you. But when I started, just so you can go back, you know, started from the beginning. What's the motherboard, the different components, Then I had a screenshot, and it's like everybody should be able, from just looking at a motherboard, be able to tell, where's the CPU, North Bridge, RAM, right, South Bridge, PCI slots, PCI Express, or X, just from looking at it. And then I also, you know, took some screenshots and showed the legacy, the North Bridge and the CPU, the front side bus. There's your graphics slot, RAM, and you see how these are all tied together, right? So my goal is to break it down at least enough where you can understand what you need to study. One, if you don't understand, that's the Q&A piece, and then go back and with resources and things that I think will help you further learn about the topics. So like I said, that's what I just need to know. Is this helping y'all? And you kind of gave me feedback already. So I do appreciate it. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, John Dre.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, could you tell me the difference between mixing computers 32 and or 64?
Okay. So the main difference between a 32-bit computer and a 64-bit is the processor. Okay, the processor is the brain of the computer, and based off of that architecture, right, 32-bit, there's 32 lanes where information can travel. Okay, um, most older computers, everything was 32-bit, and once they decided, hey, we can double the rate, that's when they made it 64-bit. Okay, so the architecture changed, and the way that the information traveled on a motherboard changed from a 32-bit to a 64-bit. It's a lot of other cool things that happen, but very, very technical stuff. Like, when you talk about virtualization and other things, um, 64-bit computers are processing. Um, your motherboard had to be 64-bit for a 64-bit processor to work on it. Okay, so you can't take a 64-bit CPU and put it in the 32-bit computer or motherboard. It's not going to work. It wasn't built for that type of processor. Okay, so 64-bit processor has to go in the 64-bit motherboard, and it's just the lanes of communication is better, more faster, um, but that's really it. Okay, so even with the software, when you're trying to download and install software, it needs to know, is this a 64-bit computer or a 32-bit computer? Okay, the way to find out, you got to go to like start and then control panel, system, and then it'll tell you what type of operating system. The operating system will tell you whether this is a 64-bit or 32-bit computer. So that's my simple definition. Not trying to go too in depth because it can go way deeper, but that's the main point. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. You got any other questions, Miss Linda?
USB firewall.
The USB. Now, like I say, those are components that are built on a motherboard. USB, all our flash drives and headsets and all that. Those ports, those are connectors. Those have to communicate to something, right? That's controlled by the South Bridge. So it's Firewire, right? Firewire. Um, People that have Macs in the Mac world used to love Firewire because that was their replacement for USB. Firewire, as far as speeds, were way faster than USB. Until USB came out with that USB 3.0 and kind of knocked Firewire out of the park with their speeds. So USB. Let me see if I could pull up something with that. Now for the A plus exam, they expect you to know, what's the bandwidth for USB and Firewire. So I'm trying to see if I can find something. Okay, here. So if you look at, you can't look at my screen, Miss Linda, but I got Professor Messer's PDF. So USB, you had a maximum of 127 ports. So one computer, right, you could daisy chain or connect up to 127 USB devices per computer. So one computer, it may come with 1 or 2 USB ports, but you could buy adapters and straight daisy chain all those up to 127 devices. Okay, now it was USB 1.1, USB 2.0. 1.1, if you look on here, the fastest it could go was 12 megabits per second. Megabits. So that's little b. Big M, little b. And that was the speed back in the day. Then they came out with USB 2.0, and that went up to 480 megabits per second. That was way faster than 12 megabits. And most devices, even to this day, has USB 2.0. Um, Now, unless you went and got a newer computer recently that have all USB 3.0, those go up to 5 gigabit per second. So you got to think a giga, that's 1,000 megabits. So for it to go up to 5 gigabits, that's like 5,000 5,000 bytes of data, which is just a lot. It's faster. So if you look at FireWire, when FireWire came out, it could only go up to 400 megabits. But that was killing, USB 1.1. So a lot of people were like, man, I'm going to just use FireWire. And then they came out with FireWire 800, which was twice of USB 2.0, which was FireWire 800 megabits. But, most Apple computers stopped using FireWire, and then they went to the Thunderbolt. And you see right here, Thunderbolt, you can get up to 10 gigabits per second per channel, or 20. So it's just Thunderbolt is kind of knocking everything out the box. But USB, FireWire, different types of connectors. You would plug in like a USB camera or a device. You got to know the difference between 1.1 and 2.0, and 3.0 is the latest one that has been out. So, okay. That's a good question. No problem. Any other questions? I hope I'm recording this.
I have another question.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you. More than making motherboards, computer, laptops, desktop, are they deleting different things in it, making it smaller, or, one part, adding components together, like the latest one, making components.
I think, yeah, with a lot of the newer, so that's why I was like, when you get a chance, and I'm just gonna show, I got Newegg up here. You can go and see, on Newegg, um, you can price out and look at the latest motherboards. And so I got one up here right now. This is a gigabyte. This is for a gaming computer. This has an LGA 1151. Now, for the exam, or in this industry, in this business, you got to think, people come to us because we're supposed to be the experts, right? We're the experts. They don't know what USB, what FireWire, what LGA, they don't care or know about any of that. They just want a computer. And if they come to you or I with their money and they want us to help them build or buy something, we have to understand, one, what are they trying to do? That's the first part. What are they trying to do? Right? If they're saying, I want you to build a gaming computer and I don't care how much it costs, right? So they want something where it might cost a little bit, but they know that the type of result that they're gonna get is worth that money. Okay, so we have to understand the different components and what things are built into these boards. So I'm just looking on this Newegg right now, and I mean, it's like I said, this is a LGA 15. This will work with an Intel Core i7. So the Core i7 to us geeks is like a V12 engine, like an Aston Martin, whatever expensive car that you could think of. That's that's the best of the best in the geek world. Okay, in this IT world. So this motherboard that I have here, it says it can work with an i7, i5, i3, a Pentium, or a Celeron. So it's like, wow, most Pentium and Celerons, in case you don't know, Pentium, well, Celeron is, when you hear Celeron, think poor man's processor, poor man's computer. Okay. Intel back in the day. So that's just like uh, Toyota, right? Toyota has the Camry, right? But then they also sell ups. They also sell Lexuses. Same company, same type of car, just a different name, right? That's the same with a motherboard as far as the type of processor that it can work with. So if I bought this Gigabyte, this could work with the best of the best, or it could also put the cheap man's processor in there. So if you go to Walmart or any of those big box stores and you be like, I could get a computer for $200, and then they have computers that are $1,000. What do you think is the difference? The difference is what they put in there, all right? It's how it's built, okay? So I'm just saying all I like to say. We can get this motherboard and put a cheap processor in it and sell it, at a certain price, and that person will be happy. Or we can get this motherboard and put the best processor in it and put the best memory in it and the best graphics cards and everything's the best, and then we can charge $1,000 for it. But it's because we understand, you know, what all these components are and what makes it the best. It's the other things that we add into the motherboard. So I know that's a long-winded answer to your question, but it's basically, it's all about how you get what you pay for. Okay?
Yeah.
You get what you pay for, and by us doing our homework, doing our study, and really immersing ourselves in this knowledge in this industry, your eyes are gonna open and see, okay, now I know why that's a $200 computer. Good, Teacher Andre said it's a Celeron processor in there. I don't want a Celeron. If I'm gonna buy something, I'm gonna at least get an i7 or an i5, right? If I can upgrade the memory, I want to get, I know that this is DDR3, and DDR3 can go up to, such and such speed, but this only has this type of speed. So things are upgradable, even stuff at the store. But it's just most people don't know that. If I go buy a car and, I got a family, it don't make sense to me go buy, an Aston Martin, even though that's what I want. I, I can't put nobody else in there. you know. So they make stuff for what people are. It's a reason why it has that price tag though. Now, if you want something better, then you know that price tag's gonna be higher. Same with motherboards, same with processors, same with memory. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. All right. Any other questions, y'all? I love the Q&A part. 'Cause that's when we can actually like try to figure out some stuff, or if it's something you've been wanting to know or confused about, let's talk about it. So, if we don't have any other questions, um, that's the end of my presentation. So, we will do this next week. And next topic, like I said, we'll be talking about BIOS. So, I'm trying to, I want to use this as a review for everybody because I know in class we're basically on Cisco. So, we're not going to be talking about, BIOS and A plus stuff anymore. To be honest, in real time, we went from entry level to like advanced IT professional type of stuff in a matter of weeks. It's taken me years to get and understand all this stuff to even be able to teach it. But I've been doing it for the last like 10 years. And, I'm on the same journey as everybody else trying to get certified. Um, but that's why I think it's good to have these reviews. And my goal, once I keep working with Charlie and get my stuff down packed, record these so then you can always go back and review it. I might put these on the site. So it's just further resources to help y'all study. Okay. So,
Miss Ann White is not with us because she had a tooth pulled.
okay. I know she would be here if it wasn't something serious.
Right, it was serious.
Yeah. But like I said, I'll know if this recording worked or not, and I'm gonna send it to y'all. If it don't work, I ain't gonna send it. That just mean I gotta do it again and until I get it right. But hopefully it worked. And I did email the other class. Did nobody join from that, but I want everybody, especially that's a part of the Urban League program, because you guys are the first group. So my success is on your success. So I'm very hopeful and just determined to help everybody that I can while I can with what I got. So, tell the other students, they should have got on. It's free. I ain't charging them nothing. And, I'm trying to help everybody get certified. Hopefully I get my voice back. Yes, I appreciate y'all. Hopefully I get my voice back by next week. I'm going to drink some tea. And I will see everybody in class on Tuesday.
Thank you very much for taking out your time. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Y'all have a good rest of your Sunday. And I will see everybody Tuesday. Okay? All right. No problem. Talk to y'all later. All right, bye bye.